Hello again, this is UML Operator. Hello again, modelers. In this session, we're going to be talking about the Sparx Enterprise Architect EA Properties Window. As in previous sessions, it's good to have the Sparx Help Center up to help you step through this subject. So we're going to go to the Start tab, we're going to go to Help, hit this little down caret, and we're going to select Open Help. This brings up the Sparx welcome page in the help area. We're going to go to the application desktop. We're going to go all the way right here to the properties window. And this is the content we're going to cover. So I want to advise you, I'm not sure how far I'm going to get into this, but you can go through the learn more. So properties windows for diagrams, elements, attributes, operations, etc. I'll try to touch on some of this, but feel free to click through at your own leisure. Now in the factory default layout, and if you haven't configured your Sparx workspace to something different, properties is in the upper right, notes is in the lower right, and your browser is on the left side. So for the start here, I'm going to leave it in the upper right, and we're going to step through the properties window. All right, so I'm in a blank class diagram called tests and a test root, test package, and I need toolbox. So I'm going to go to start, design, toolbox, and I'm good with it right here now. Let's bring in a class element. Let's grab this arrow, hold down the mouse button, let it go, and create another class using association. So I've got class 1 and class 2 with an association. You notice when I'm selecting the diagram, I have a diagram properties window, right? And there's lots of material. We'll try to step through not all of this, but most of this as we go forward. When I select an element, look over here at the properties, it changes to an element property view. So here's all of the properties for this element. Here are the properties for this element. And if I select the line association, here are the properties for a connector, right? And we'll step through each one of these, don't worry. As I have talked about in previous videos, there's a couple of ways to get to properties. You can double click in the diagram and you bring up the properties window with various tooling on the left in the dialog box. And the other way to do it is right click, and you have in this pop-up menu properties, you can bring it up. This applies to elements, even associations. If I double click, I get to the dialog box for this class element. Here's the properties right here. All the properties relevant to it. And there's some other tooling on here, but we're focused on properties, right? And the same thing goes with associations. I can double click and I bring up the association properties window, right? I've got roles, constraints, binding, etc., right? The other way is I can right click on the line and I can bring up properties. Now this data, I'm double click on this one. This data resides in a SQL database. So here's some, I don't want to fill these things up. So these notes are in a SQL database in the TObjects table, and these are notes. These properties are also in the TObjects table, SQL table, as well as various other places. So there's lots of different properties you can access. However, when you're in a SQL server other than your local environment, you might be in a SQL server within your own server farm. You might be in a SQL server in cloud, whether that's Azure, AWS, or something else. Sometimes the latency to bring up these properties when you double click is a little slow, right? So it's a little slow. It's faster to actually use the windows to view that SQL within your local tooling. So let's click on the diagram. You see we've got a properties window across the top. You've got a toolbar. If you make changes in properties, right now you can see this disk icon for save is disabled. If you see this light up, you can simply select this disk icon for save or hit Control S. There is a hamburger here that provides you an ability very quickly to get to diagram properties. All right, to bring it up, you can do that. And there's a lot of things that are disabled. They're not available to you in this particular properties window. So we'll look at some other examples. And let's hit find. This is one you're going to use a lot. Or Alt-G, the shortcut is what I use. But you're able to quickly find the diagram in your browser much faster. So if I'm on like a model like this, and I'm in the diagram area, and I want to find it in the browser, it goes right to where it is, which is very useful. The next tool item that we have is switch display, so you can select any element. Let's select association, and you can click this, and it goes to the property window for the element or item selected. So if I'm in the diagram, another way to bring up the properties dialog box extremely quickly. So again, a time saver. You're going to be using that quite a bit when you need to get to the window. Otherwise, you can manage a lot of these properties right within the properties window without using compute resources to populate via the SQL instance this particular dialog box. And the next option or tool is special action. I'm not going to get into this. Essentially, if you have elements that have special action properties, this will bring you right to that. Otherwise, if you don't on a particular element, it'll just go to the properties window. And that's enough I'm going to say on that one. I'll cover that more in advanced sessions. So to recap, depending on the element that you're on, so I've selected the diagram, I have the diagram properties window. We'll get back to this in a second. If I select an element, you can see I'm in the element properties. If I select a connector, an association, a line, I'm in the connector properties. And we'll get back to these in a little more detail when I get to a more advanced model. So in each one of them, elements, you'll see you've got another tab here called tags. This is where tagged values are exposed if applicable to the element. So when you go to an association, you can assign or bring in tags. Now these are disabled. There may be some tagged values underneath that drive these elements according to OMG standards or the MDG, model-driven generator technology you may be using. Those would be underneath these disabled. You can't open these elements. But if you're in an element that does have tag values, in this case, this component element has 2 tagged values, they would be exposed when you selected them. So I've got the element properties and I have the tag values. And I'll touch a little bit more on this in a moment. So we've talked a bit about element properties. Let's go to associations. You're going to be using this one quite a bit. I'm going to go to the connector. So if I double click on this, I have the ability over here in general to manage the source to target, bring in an alias if applicable, set the direction, and do other things. I'm going to cancel, and we've selected a connector, an association in this case. The type is association. I refer to a lot of lines as associations, whether they're generalization, composition, aggregation, but this is literally an association type. You can come in here and make changes to the properties, not of course the type. You do that in another area I talk about in a separate video, but you can add any name you want. So right now it's blank and I'm just going to put in line. You can see now line shows up on this particular association or connector. You can add in a stereotype. As soon as I click the triple dots, let me do that again. As soon as I click the triple dots, I get different stereotypes that may be available. Like for instance, we may be using TCP/IP network connectivity. So I want to add that stereotype. There we go. We've got that stereotype. And you can manage your stereotypes from the properties window, right? Source and direction, right? So you know what the source is, which is class 1, and the target is class 2. So if I was to put in an alias And I'm just going to literally type in alias. It doesn't show, but if I was searching, filtering, or if I was in the diagram, and I'm going to open up the properties, use alias if available. In that particular case, look at that. We're using the alias instead of the name. Down in directions, I can change the direction, bidirectional. Now I've got arrows on both sides of the line, source to destination, from the source to the destination, and I can go vice versa. So very quickly, you can manage properties of elements, diagrams, and lines using the properties window. All right, style. I'm going to cover this probably more details. But right now, the default is custom line style. It's really not much different than direct line style. You can get into orthogonal squares, so you can do things like if I put a break in this, hit Control Q on the line, I can bring this. Let me do that again, Control Q. I'm going to put another break right here. Now I'm orthogonal. So I'm able to manage my line types using the properties window. All right. And then associations, abstract, derived. I'll cover these, visibility. I'll cover these in more advanced sessions. But let's get to source on the tab window. You're going to use this quite a bit, especially when you get into roles and cardinality. So I'm going to double click on this. And then here's roles right here. So I've got source, I've got target, I can add notes, I can pick particular references or roles. Right now they're blank, there's nothing there, but I'll teach you later on how to establish roles so you can do role assignment very quickly. I'm going to cancel. In this case, we're on source, so I have multiplicity. I can state that, well, this is one to many, and I can go to target and I can say this is one. And so you can see I've assigned cardinality using the properties window. So that's very powerful. Now, I'll get into more advanced subjects around properties association, roles, cardinality, multiplicity. I'll get to that in later sessions. Constraints, you can apply constraints. And a constraint is something that is true. It's evaluated to be true. Default is invariant. You have postcondition, precondition, process, and OCL. So I am going to not get into that, but you can define constraints instead of going to the double click on the properties. There's constraints. I can define them there. Or very quickly in the properties window under the constraint tab, do that there. Binding, and again, tags. If there's tags available at particular associations, you can apply tag values using the properties window. All right, I'm in the work area. I'm just going to select anywhere in the white space. It gives me focus on the properties window for diagram. So I can manage the name, change the name here. You can see it's called test. I can change the name. The type, you change another way. I cover that in another video. Stereotype, you can add stereotypes if applicable to diagrams. Right now there are none. You can change the author, manage the author. I wouldn't suggest doing that. Follow your own governance and conventions. There's lots of things you can do here. Go down to version. If you make changes in the model, you can change the version number. You can filter to version, new to version. I cover this more advanced subject. Appearance. So you've got diagram as, display as rather, diagram in this case. You can go to specification. It's in the specification view. In a moment, this arrow pops up. As soon as the database refreshes, I can hit the back button and go back to diagram. And you can see it took me back to the diagram. The one you're going to be using a lot and switching between specification view, not list view, project management. Later on, you'll get into Gantt views, but relationship matrices, especially when you're in a complex, you're able to bring up very quickly a relationship matrix or matrices for elements. We only have two elements in here. It's not too complicated. One association with multiplicity. So I'm going to hit the back arrow, select in the diagram, go back to display as diagram. I can change to whiteboard. Very cute. So let Let me go to pan and zoom, make this a little larger. So fit, there we go. Fit, go back to properties. So you can go to hand-drawn mode. So when you're working on concept models and you're publishing them, it's helpful to be in whiteboard mode so people don't take your diagrams seriously. They just know that they're concepts. So whiteboard's kind of cool, like you're on a whiteboard, right? Hand drawing these things. And of course there is whiteboard mode, just makes everything black and white. So you're using coloring. It just cleans it up, makes it black and white and simple. So now I'm in hand-drawn mode, whiteboard mode, and collaborating in some way. All right, so I'm going to turn those back to regular. Custom style, you can very quickly go to custom styles. I'll cover this in another video. Just gives you more tooling so you can rotate, turn, choose sizes. Very powerful feature. I'm going to go back to regular. There we go. And you can do other things. All right. So go down to advanced. Every element, even diagrams, has a global unique ID reference. So this would be that key value. We'll talk more about that in more advanced subjects, but that becomes very useful. All right. So MDG technology, model-driven generation technology. If it's applicable, it will show here what you're using. WebEA, I'll cover it in another session. And then connectors, you can see show relationship. We can hide. Oh, let me select the diagram. There we go. You can hide and show, hide and show. That becomes useful, especially in complex models. So let me make sure I select it. You can hide associations or connectors. So they're hidden. There's none showing. So often when you want to focus on elements, that becomes a useful feature. You can show and hide stereotypes. This might be one you use quite a bit. So show, hide. So sometimes you have a lot of stereotypes and you don't want to expose them. You can very quickly turn those off there. Right? I'm not going to get into UML notation. I covered that in the database modeling video. But you're able to manage that there. Default is UML 2.1 on these models. So that covers connectors. All right, compartments. So this one becomes very useful when you want to expose attributes, hide them, operations. So there really aren't any attributes. Let me turn these off. There really isn't any of these package contents, right? So if I had tag values, let me add a couple of tag values and I'll be right back. All right, adding this is going to change the size. So let me move these lines. There we go, like that. So let's say you've got here's your class 1 and your class 2, right? So I'm in diagram properties, I'm in compartments. If I have attributes, let me select, you can show and hide those. You see that? So I have operations, I can show and hide operations, just like that. If I've got tag values, I can show and hide tag values. If I have requirements, I can show and hide requirements. So sometimes when you're collaborating with folks, you might be talking about the attributes first. So you just want them focused on the attributes and you're exposing the conversation. You might leave the attributes on and go to the operations, or turn the attributes off and focus the conversation just on the operations. You may be having the operations on and you want to focus on the tags or tag values that have been added to the particular elements. You can leave those on. And if you're writing requirements, depending on how many you've internalized, you can expose whatever the requirements are. And you can very quickly double click those, go right to the dialog box, or you'll see over here in notes in the lower right, when I select the elements, the property for a requirement shows up, so I can manage the properties. I can come in here, set the priority to MVP. I can edit the notes down below relevant to the requirement, whatever the requirement statement is. So I'm going to go back, select in the diagram, go back to diagram properties. So in the properties window, you can see you can move very quickly between things. So as soon as I select an element inside, I go to the operation properties. And if I had tag values and I don't for the operations, talk about that in an advanced subject, you're able to very quickly get to them. So requirements, you can get into tag values, you can add notes to even tag values and manage the tag value. Sorry, let me go over to one of those. You can go very quickly get to the properties of each one of these as you're moving around your models, doing your brainstorming, your analysis, and of course your design. I'm going to wrap up with the last tab in the properties window, and that's objects zOrder. So when I select this, there's only 2 elements in here. It's not complicated. So you probably wouldn't use this feature in Sparx for this, but when you go to more complex models, you can see I have a lot of elements. I have 46 elements in here. So what is zOrder mean? So in computer graphics and user interface design in particular, and that's where I use it the most, zOrder is derived from z-axis, and it refers to the order in which graphical elements or objects are displayed in a 3-dimensional space. In this case, we're in a 2-dimensional surface, so it just helps you organize from top to bottom your stack of graphical elements so that you can manage and understand them. So if I come in this model and I'm just going to select anyone in here, you can see this is the zOrder from 1. As I select each one of them, they turn blue or dark blue. So I'm going to select number 2. Let's see, I want to look at what number 9 is, or talk about number 9, or focus on number 9. I'm able to manage or look at the zOrder of how things are. So I don't use it necessarily for discussion because I created a pattern that brings in discussion elements. I don't think I would be discussing in one sitting 46 elements, but I certainly could. And I can document the 46 elements using the zOrder references, but I wouldn't do that. You're able to grab elements and move them up. You see that? So this is 9 position. I moved it to 8 position, right? Let me grab one that's easier, account, right? So I'm on account. Let's see, if it's locked, I can't move it. So I moved to the 12th position. I can move it to the 11th position. And it won't allow me to move it any higher in that, which is a good thing, because if you're not careful, you can actually change the zOrder of something and put it behind an element. Let's look at zOrder from another perspective. So when you're in layout, so I'm going to go to the layout tab, you can see I have the ability to move things top to bottom. So let's grab this element and I want to move it behind Web Store. I wouldn't want to do that, but what if I accidentally lost that particular element? How would I bring it back up? Well, the first thing is I can go over and find that element within my models and it would show up. So I'm over in the browser on the item customers that I just moved into the back. I could find this in the diagram and you can see it's outlined. I can come to layout alignment and I can bring it back up to the top. But another way to do that, if I'm on the diagram and I'm in zOrder, and let me just go to, now I've moved it to the 1st position. So it's up above number 1. So it's all the way here, right? And that's not necessarily what I want. Let me move it down. So I'm moving it down. You can see now it's in the 6th position. Look at the counter as I'm moving it down. 7th position, 8th position. And what it did was it moved this, which was 8, to 7. And I could move it down further. Now I'm making it 9. Now this one switched to 8. So if you know what the element is and it's hidden, or you grab you hold down the left mouse button, you select items, and you come to layout alignment, I can move all of these up, and it will change the zOrder positioning of the elements. All right. In the beginning, this text box was 1. All right. So this text box, if I go to zOrder and I was to find monolithic application, it's now 16. I know it looks like 6, but if I was to move over more or grab all these, Control A, slide this over a little bit more, go back to zOrder, you can see it's 16. I can move this item, 876, all the way back up to 1, and it changed everything that was before that back. So zOrder, that's object zOrder. You can use it to communicate. Sometimes I'm using when I'm doing analysis and I want to look at each element from a numeric reference. But don't count on that, because you can very quickly mess that up if you're trying to document by just moving something to the front or the back, and it will change the zOrder, zeta order. And so I wouldn't count on that. But and I'll cover this in another session, but I usually bring in special elements, 1 through 10, 1 through 20, and I'll drop those in my model as discussion points. Those are fixed as elements in my models, and I can document and I can cover those from that perspective. Okay, let's recap. I covered a couple of hours of course material in 30 minutes. So it sometimes can run even longer in more advanced courses that I hold. But I know I covered everything really fast. I'll have chapters down below, and you can click through those, come back to as you want. So to recap, we talked about the properties window. In the properties window, it can reside anywhere in your tooling you want. I cover that in another session, so you can put it anywhere you like. Right now, by default, it's in the upper right-hand corner. So we covered the properties window. We covered the toolbar in the properties window. We covered the tabs in the properties window. So I'm on the diagram. I'm in the diagram property tooling. All right. I'm on an element. I'm in the element property tooling. We talked about properties relevant to elements. We talked about tag values. We talked about connector elements, source, target. We talked about the tabs that are there. So we covered a great deal of material. In the diagram, especially, you're able to do really cool things like expose metadata or properties within your elements, your diagrams, your models. Maybe you want clean models that don't have a lot of garbage in them. Like if I go over to, let's see here, find in browser, let's go back up to this one. So in this case, I have a pretty clean diagram. So I just have a diagram with nothing in it. I have a diagram with requirements or responsibilities in it, and then custom drawn. I have a custom drawn diagram. These are the exact same elements, but I'm able to paint them, configure them using properties and capabilities within Sparx EA in order to depict and reference my diagrams and my documentation the way that is most productive for the stakeholders, the audience in which I'm working with. So I hope this video helped you. I'll be covering this more in other sessions as we go forward. Thanks very much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later, and happy modeling.